Hello, world. Welcome to the Speed Strength Show. I'm Braden.
I'm Tommy. And if you ordered chicken wings with a side of boiled egg, either at a restaurant or for takeout, what would you expect to show up on your plate?
This, chicken wings, and then a boiled egg. I don't know, like, yeah, a hard boiled egg, I guess. I don't know I don't
I
know what
know this
else.
question seems like it's like out of nowhere,
Yeah,
but this was a conversation that came up the other day. So this is like conversation question slash rant
sure.
for our random banter. But this individual was disappointed that the chicken wings and the egg were not like one concoction or one. And I was like, it was a side of boiled
Yeah,
egg. So I was like, I feel like the very definition of something on the side is that it's not part of the other thing that you ordered. It's on the
yeah.
side.
Literally, it's on the side. Like you can, if you're ordering, like Brown and I like to order. We like to get shawarma sometimes, and the hot sauce for the shawarma is like it's really hot, so I don't get any. But she likes to have a little bit. But if you order mild, it's still too much. So you get the hot sauce on the side, so that it's not part of the thing. Like it's on the side is literally separate. That's the point of it.
Yeah. So this is the part that confused me as I was trying to take as many like vantage points as I could to try to put myself in this situation. I'm like, how did you ever expect the egg and the chicken wings, which to be is an odd enough combo to begin with,
Hmm.
but that beside the point, why would the why would the egg be part of the chicken wings you ordered if it explicitly states it's on the side? I don't know why the expectation would be there for them to be combined.
Yeah, that doesn't make sense to me. Like yeah, it's a ridiculous combination. B, how could you mix eggs with chicken wings? Like chicken wings are on the bone, they're a finger food. I don't know if it's mixed together. I feel like that's like it's a stir fry or it's like a pasta, it's a salad, it's something like, like it's all cohesive when chicken wings are like their own thing always. And then if you're gonna mix them, like how many chicken wings was it? Because you get
Probably like a
like,
pound or two.
yeah, a pound or two of wings with like mixed in with one egg. Like you're getting a sliver of egg with every chicken wing if it's mixed together. I don't know. That doesn't make any sense.
So I'm not like offside here for thinking
No, this
like
person's
why would this
ridiculous.
egg like why would they be in the same platter? It's
Yeah.
and to me
Yeah.
the part that kills me is like it's on the side. Like if you ordered a burger with French fries on the side, they don't throw the French fries on your burger. It comes
Yeah. It
as
would
a
be a
set.
topping.
Yeah, it's like a separate plate. It's or
Yeah.
the little I don't know what you call those fried dishes that they're like
Like an
the
like an
it's not a
appetizer or
bowl,
something.
but it's you know
It's
what I
like
mean?
an appetizer or like a shareable or like a platter. I don't know.
Yeah, so it comes in those things. So yeah, I was just so thrown off by this
Yeah.
chicken wing egg thing. I was like, I need to ask Braden about this because like maybe I'm wrong. Maybe the
No,
chicken wing
that's
and the egg should have been together in one like
no, that's strange. Like it would be very explicit in the menu if that was the case. Because even when you're ordering chicken wings, like lately, I feel like chicken wings are a whole thing where it's a step by step. Like first you pick, how many you want, and then you pick the sauce, and then you pick, do you want it breaded or not? Do you want it in the oven? Do you want it fried? You know, if you have the option to have eggs mixed in with it, like that would be in there. That would be like maybe a sauce option. It's just eggs. I don't know.
oh, that'd be terrible. Oh. So yeah, I was just like I guess they were disappointed because the expectation was they were like, "Huh, I wonder how they do this chicken wing and egg thing together. I'm going to order that." But then it's like it's on the side. So I don't know
Yeah,
what you were
it's like
actually hoping for.
any other side would be on the side.
Okay. I just
Um,
wanted to make sure I wasn't like
no,
losing my mind.
you're
And then it's like,
firmly yeah, you're firmly on base with that one. Um, did you like did do you know how they ate this? Like did they construct what they were thinking of themselves? Like, did they smush up the egg and mix it around
No, so I wasn't
with the
there.
wings or something?
I was hearing this secondhand from someone who like I said, they were upset that it wasn't all one thing. And I guess they thought I was going to be like, "Oh yeah, like
Yeah,
why would they do that? That's stupid. I feel like they ripped you off." But I was like, "Nah, you ordered a side of boiled egg." So it was just like a boiled egg on the side apparently in a separate container because it was takeout. I'm like, and that
yeah,
makes sense because it's a side,
uh-huh,
so it's going to be separate,
yeah,
not with the wings you ordered.
uh-huh,
And so the wings were in one
mm,
container and the boiled egg was in the other. So I imagine you just ate it like you would any hard boiled egg, like 1 or 2 bites. You eat the egg and then you
and
have
then
your
eat the
chicken
wings.
wings and
Yeah,
carrot and celery sticks or whatever. And that was in the other container.
yeah, that's interesting. Have you ever had a similar experience? I guess I don't know. Have you ever
No,
been
because
misled by the menu?
that's a good question. I don't think so. Not like that, because I'm certain if I order a side of something that it's going to come on the side, separate from
Hmm.
what's it called? Like the main dish or the main thing that I've ordered. But I mean, I've gone to restaurants and the food wasn't going to be as good as I thought or something like that. But I don't think I've ever had like an order that's completely like misled me. Where I was like, oh, I'm going to get like a burger type thing. And then it ends up being like a pasta dish. And I'm like,
Mm,
this doesn't check out. I don't think I've ever been confused, let's say,
hmm.
what I've ordered.
Mm. Well, that's good.
Sure, I've been disappointed
Yeah,
sometimes
yeah,
with the
we all
food,
have.
but why have you had an incident like this before?
No, no, nothing like that. Nothing where I expected a topping and it became a side or vice versa. Um, the only thing that comes to mind is like, I guess if you go to like, I don't know, like I guess it would have to be food that you don't eat a lot. Maybe like if you go to sushi and like you don't like the pictures aren't always 100% accurate, so you're not really sure what you're getting. Or if yeah, I don't know, like I don't have a lot of experience with like Thai or Indian food more lately, so I could order something. It could be something that I don't expect. Um, but the only thing that comes to mind really is one time I was picking up like McDonald's drive-through for somebody else, and I definitely got like whoever was in front or behind me in the drive-through, I got their order because it was like I ordered one thing and I got like two sandwiches and a side of fries, and like none of them was what I ordered. It was completely like 100% a different thing.
So they just completely botched the order.
Yeah. I mean, I like to assume that they got the order correct, just the person was incorrect or the
Yeah.
car was incorrect.
You know, this reminds me of a story. I don't know if it's true or not. I can maybe confirm after. But I'm pretty sure my dad one time ordered a burger from McDonald's, and I guess they were asking like what toppings, and he just said, "No, I want a plain burger with like
Mm.
nothing on it." So I guess, and that way you just get the ketchup, the mustard, and the bag or the takeout, and then you can put it on. And I supposedly, again, I don't know how true this is, but supposedly they just gave him 2 buns. So their interpretation of a plain burger
Oh,
was just nothing in between the buns.
yeah, you've told me about that before.
So, and again, I don't know if it's true or not. I'd have to double check with him to see if this was actually the case or if he was
I don't
just
know. Yeah,
like
I feel
throwing in
like if
some
I've heard the story
hyperbole.
before, it's true.
But so, I mean, I
Yeah.
guess that could be, but that to me is a mistake on, if that did happen, that's a mistake on McDonald's part because a plain burger is not just buns.
Yeah. Like if
So,
anything, I'd assume it'd be like the burger without buns, if anything, you know.
so again, I can't confirm or deny if that story is true. I wasn't there for it. So I didn't like see the order with
Mm.
my own eyes, but I guess that maybe falls in kind of the same category of not getting what you expected when you ordered food.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's correct there. That's correct there. That's funny. Yeah, that's such a ridiculous thing to have
Yeah,
to
plain burger,
assume.
please. Here's some buns.
Yeah.
Nothing else.
Yeah. Literally, I didn't mention the buns one time. I said burger. That was the only thing I said.
Yeah.
Oh, that's funny. I feel like that's kind of a smooth transition actually to what we're talking about today, in that sometimes when people have, a lot of training success, the first thing that I was thinking about before recording this was newer athletes. And you start training, you have a lot of success early, you're seeing your numbers go up, up, or down if that's what you want them to do.
Yeah. In
Sometimes you
some
want the numbers
cases.
to go down.
Correct.
um, but then at a certain point you get something that maybe you don't expect and hard stall, you hit a wall, and it seems like no matter what you do, the numbers are staying the same or going in the opposite direction that you want. um, yeah, that was, in talking about plateaus, that was not the first thing that came to my mind, but that helped me problem solve a little bit, I guess.
Yeah. And getting to that idea of, like a plateau, and what happens when you start to see the performance kind of level off, right? We always want to see an increase in performance. Like you said, whether that's numbers going up or down depends on the quality you're looking at.
Yeah,
Weight room
like,
numbers, we'd want to see go up.
mm-hmm,
Sprinter agility or change of direction times, you would want to see go down.
mm-hmm,
But like you said, that increase in performance is ultimately what we're looking for. And if we don't continue to improve and see improvements, then our performance kind of flatlines. And then we have to figure out, okay, where do we go? Where do we go next? How do we break through this plateau and actually start to create some change for like on the positive side of what we're doing?
mm-hmm. I thought it was really interesting when you proposed the idea of this episode. And so, like, today, probably we'll see where the conversation goes. We're going to talk more specifically about speed plateaus. Um,
Yeah,
and I
speed,
thought,
movement, change of direction. It's
yeah.
all kind of encompassed a little bit in the same thing, unless you get into the real nitty gritty.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
So when you proposed the idea, I thought it was really interesting how you phrased it, because you to improve speed, like, you need to do speed. To get faster, you need to go fast as you can, generally speaking. But if you do the same thing all the time, so if you're just doing fast all the time, then there's not enough. Eventually your body adapts to the stimulus, and there's nothing, like, it gets comfortable, you could say, where there's nothing, I'm good enough to do what you're asking me to do, so I'm just not going to change. And that essentially, I think, is what a plateau is physiologically. um, but as we've talked about on other episodes, speed is such like a volatile adaptation that if you stop doing it for, like, maybe 5 days, you can start to see declines already in performance. So it's one of the, like, you have to change what you're doing, but you also kind of can't stop what you're doing.
yeah, and it was a concept that I first saw in should say the first sort of notion of that came up was when I've read the stuff by Charlie Francis, because he always talked about not wanting to stray too far from speed. Because he's like, if you do a whole bunch of speed work and you get faster and you get to whatever point, and now you take time off and then you do other things, the speed level starts to drop. And then he's like, and then you start to do more speed work and you come back up. And he's like, you may only keep getting to that same point. So you want to continue to do speed work to keep improving and building on the previous speed work or fast movement or anything. You want to build on the previous training you've done to start reaching higher levels. And so, okay, great. You got to leave speed, agility, change of direction, these fast movements in a lot of the time. But then there's a really interesting paper from uh, Dr. Manfred Steinbeck, and I think it was from 1963 or 67. He was an East German, like, neuroscientist slash track coach, I think. And so he had this interesting paper where he talked about speed creating speed. So, like you mentioned before, you have to do fast things in order to make the body move fast. So whether that's changing direction, whether that's sprinting, if you do it slow, the body won't adapt in the way you want. So you have to move fast to challenge the coordination aspect of the movement in order to get better at doing it fast. But then the problem with speed work is it creates stagnation. So if you just try to keep your foot on the gas and do everything as fast as you can all the time, then you end up with this kind of like you've talked about, a plateau or this stagnation, and then you have nowhere to go. So if speed creates speed, but speed creates stagnation, how do we actually break this loop? Right? How do we leave that stuff in year round? How do we continue to build on our ability to sprint fast or change direction or do any of these high speed movements without basically creating this plateau or this stagnation that we know we're going to get into? And so, yeah, like you mentioned today, we'll talk a lot about, or centered around, what are some of the strategies we can use to effectively break this loop of this speed creates speed, but speed creates stagnation. So what can we do to break that cycle and continue to climb and improve in our performance?
Yeah, and I thought it was cool because I expect that there's a little bit of parallels in there with strength work, where obviously to get stronger you need to lift things that are heavy, but if you only lift things that are very heavy, then you are, yeah, same thing. Like it ends up being the same stimulus, so your body doesn't have to adapt, and then you have nowhere to go from there because you're already maxing out. So like literally, what do you do next? But the difference I think that makes strength plateaus, and they still happen, and people still, experience them for a long time and get very frustrated with them. But you can do a lot of different stuff with strength because it's a much, it lasts a lot longer. It doesn't, if you don't lift something very heavy within 5 days, you can still probably lift that same heavy thing, you know, within, a few percent of whatever that number is. But that's not quite the case for speed stuff.
Yeah, a lot of the high speed coordinative stuff, again, whether that's sprinting, change of direction, it's all, yeah, like you said, it's a pretty sensitive quality where if we stop doing it for a month, you're going to start to see decreases in performance and the ability to coordinate the limbs and figure out the movement and stuff like that. So yeah, like you said, the frequency of it needs to be higher. We need to make sure we keep that in a little bit more. And so to me, there's a couple of ways you can look at it. You can either find ways to vary the movement, or there's ways that we can kind of constrain or put some sort of outside constraint on the movement in order to challenge the actual pattern. So one of the interesting things with running, right, if you look at it from like a motor learning, coordination, sort of perception ability. I don't know, Braden, did you take 356 and 357 in
That's motor
undergrad?
learning. That's
Yeah,
motor learning.
356 was the perceptions class.
Yeah, I took them both. I didn't do super well in one of them. I don't remember which one.
Oh, like those were two of my favorite classes.
Okay.
And so if we kind of look at some of that type of background, right, whether, so if we look at something like perception, how do we perceive the outside world, right? There's a number of different theories in terms of how do we take information into our body, process it, and then produce movement. And so with that aspect of it, as much as there's different theories, one of the central things that they all kind of agree upon is that the body tries to have as few movements as possible stored, because that makes it easier to retrieve stuff. Right? So think about like a computer. If you had 9,000 files, it's going to be a lot harder to find something than if you had 9 files, because the number is so different. So in this case, if we look at sprinting or change of direction, it's a locomotion pattern. It's a running based movement, whether I'm running and then cutting left or right, or running in a straight line or running in a bend, the body is likely picking or drawing on that movement pattern and then adjusting it to fit the outside scenario, right? Whether you're on a soft surface, a hard surface, are you reacting to a ball? Are you doing whatever? So that to me plays a crucial role in how can we still do speed work consistently and continue to improve, is that if the body is just using that one pattern and then modifying it, if we throw variations or constraints at that pattern, it should then in turn improve that pattern and improve our ability to run, change direction, and coordinate really high limb velocities in what we're doing. So to me anyway, that's kind of the basis of how do we challenge the body from a speed perspective and then continue to create adaptation over time without having to not do speed work.
Yeah, and I think that makes a lot of sense, and I think there's definitely some similarities with strength stuff as well. Um, One of the things that I hear, if we're building on that idea, and in my world, some things that people will talk about with regards to powerlifting, because it is such you know, um, a specific sport, you could say. There's not a lot of variation in what you have to do. Um, that there's some benefit in having like a really consistent, specific, refined movement pattern. And they're absolutely, what you're describing to me is more of like a broad movement pattern where you have like the center of it, and then you've got um, like deviations on either side. So if you end up a little bit outside of your normal, you're still okay, and you can come back. And I mean, I think that way makes it a stronger pattern overall. But some people, I think that can take away from like the center of it, like the main thing. Like if you're a 100-meter sprinter, and I don't know what constraints you would put on it. Maybe one of them is like parachute running or something that's going to change how you run a little bit, and then maybe that's going to take away from how you actually run, come race time.
Yeah. And so that's a great point that you bring up, because yes, you still need to practice the actual competitive event that you're going to do, if whether that's like you said, track sprinting, where you have to pick up as much speed as possible and run in your lane, or whether that's like a ball sport where you're running and navigating on the field as fast as you can, doing certain movements or carrying a ball or whatever. You still need to make sure that that's there. But exactly like you said, are there ways that we can challenge that? And whether you want to vary the movement a little bit or add a constraint, to me the important thing that kind of sits in the middle is that, is the intent and the output still there? So we can vary the movement a little bit. So let's say something like curvilinear running versus straight line running. We could constrain the movement a little bit. So maybe, like you said, a parachute, a sled, some form of resistance. But if the output is still really high, and if the limb velocities are still really high, then we're still addressing that speed creates speed notion, right? Because if I have a sled or a parachute, I'm still trying to run as fast as I can. So the limb velocity is still going to be very high. The output from my brain to the muscles to input a very powerful signal is still going to be there. And that would be the same idea if I was running in a curvilinear way or running left or running right. Those central criteria are still met. So then again, it should then transfer to the other movements that we're doing or help sustain those abilities because it's meeting the central demands.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, that makes sense for sure. How much? So we're talking about speed creates speed. How much do you think is the actual, like, if you have, I don't know, if you have like you drop maybe like 0.2 seconds off of your 200-meter time or whatever, how much percentage wise would you contribute that speed improvement to the amount of times you did something fast versus the amount of times you did something with that same really high output? Does that make sense? Like where, like how much does it matter how much like the speed of the thing you're doing relative to the speed of competition is versus the output of the thing you're doing relative to the output of competition? Does that make sense?
Yeah. So correct
Like
me if I'm
is
wrong then. So
it
you're
the
looking
speed or
at,
is it the output? How much do you think plays into it, the speed versus the output? Because you could do something with like a trillion reverse bands that would be really, really fast, but lower output. And you can obviously do a maximal squat, which is really, really slow, but very high output.
yeah. So the most important thing to me that would come back to is the velocity of the movement.
Mm.
Because whether it's straight line running in track and field, whether it's curvilinear running on a basketball court or a rugby pitch or something like that, the the coordination is the root of that movement. And if you can coordinate the speed of your limbs really well, that's going to allow you to apply force better. It's going to allow you to be in better positions. It 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 does govern a lot. So if you were looking for, yeah, like especially a very small improvement in speed, acceleration, change of direction, to me, the limb velocity and the coordination piece is going to be more important than, like you said, just the overall output in terms of what you're doing.
I guess that does make sense because I guess as I learn a little bit more about the body and like the nervous system and from like a mobility standpoint, there's certain like your body won't give you access to ranges of motion that you can't control or that you can't come back from. And I've heard of people talk about how part of jump training needs to be landing mechanics because your body won't let you jump high enough to get to a point that you can't land safely from, and things like that. So if you make the movement easier, I guess a lower output, but faster, and you can control how your body is moving at that speed, then your body is going to be like, oh, okay, I guess we can probably handle a little bit more than we thought. And will potentially give you access to a little bit more output because you've shown that you can control it.
Yeah, and that's the whole point. That's where the stagnation part kind of comes in, right? Where, yeah, you don't have access, you don't have ability to get to a faster speed because you can't coordinate the movement, the timing, the force application, all those things at that given speed. So then you're stuck running at whatever speed or changing direction in whatever time frame because you're not actually capable of stepping outside of that and handling it. So again, anytime we can throw in those variations of those constraints, it challenges the coordination, it challenges the movement pattern of running, sprinting, changing direction. And
Okay.
then if we challenge that pattern, that's going to help create a learning environment for that
Mm,
movement and then allows us to break through the plateau while
okay.
still doing something that's fast and has the output to maintain the speed qualities that we need.
Interesting. Okay. I feel like I feel like a lot of people that look at track stuff and if they saw somebody doing sleds or doing like parachute running and stuff like that, they would assume, um I mean, I would assume literally until this conversation that it's for, generally speaking, starting strength and like the acceleration phase or like hills and stuff like that, the acceleration phase, which we've talked about in like to an extent it is, because that's the part where you need to be strong is when you're pushing out of the blocks kind of thing. And I actually had listened to a podcast with Cal Dietz a couple weeks ago with his triphasic training and talking
I'm
about
gonna
like
say the triphasic guy.
when you when you need to do different stuff, and that was really interesting. But um the fact, like, I guess it can be used for that, but it can also be used for just coordination stuff because it changes how your limbs need to move, and it can still be a very high velocity thing.
Exactly. And that's where you start to get, there's a whole bunch of options that you can get into in terms of how do you create these variations? How do you create these constraints? Um, and yeah, sleds, hills, parachutes, any form of resisted running is exactly that. It will slow down the potential, right? So if you look at someone accelerating up on a hill or using a sled, it slows down the movement. So then it slows down the change in position, right? So that to an extent challenges the pattern differently than it would if you were just doing an open sprint. So if you were getting back into things and doing open running where you were just running with nothing, and then you add in a sled or go on a hill, that creates some variation in what's required out of the movement pattern, but it still allows you to run fast and have pretty high outputs and put force in the ground, and you have to coordinate things at high speed, but it changes it ever so slightly, whether that's from a being able to put more force into the ground afterwards, or whether that's being able to change position better as you transition from moving from a lower position to a higher position, and then potentially back to a lower position if you're changing direction. So that's an example of something that you can throw in to create variation and to extend your opportunity to create speed without the risk of stagnating because you've made a change and you've challenged that pattern and challenged the way that that athlete has to do that movement.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah, and you've mentioned on previous episodes, I think maybe the assessment episode, I don't know, one of the earlier ones, where hill sprints was something that you would do with it, like to work on accelerations, people that had a harder time with accelerations, um, because it allowed you to mimic the same sort of transition, kind of from like low up and up to like the upright sprinting, um, but at a slower speed, slightly slower speed, still the same high output. But because it's a slower speed, you have more time, I think it was, to
Yeah.
focus on that coordination, to like learn the mechanics of that transition.
Yeah. And it
Um,
affords you a larger window of time to apply the force. So you can
mhm,
hold that lower position a little bit better as well.
mhm, mhm. Are you concerned at all with like some of those, like parachute running and like sleds and hills are obviously going to be a little bit slower, not a lot probably, but a little bit slower than your, race times. Um, are you concerned with that drop in speed?
I mean, there's, like you said, once you add that element in, there's going to be a drop in
Mm,
speed. I think the only time you would get concerned with the drop in velocity or the drop in output is within a session.
mm,
So if you saw that the earlier runs were at whatever time or whatever speed, and then you start to see that dropping off, then that's a sign, okay, they're fatigued, they're tired. We probably need to move on
yeah,
to
then
something else.
you're not getting the same output at that point.
Yeah. And then honestly, like that's a whole nother separate discussion of the weight on a sled, right? That's a whole nother, like if you have a very heavy sled, then it changes the adaptation that you're getting
Mm,
out of it versus if you have a lighter sled. So there's options available to you to do that. But if you wanted to stay within that, you know, higher limb velocity, higher speed outputs, challenging sort of the coordination of something that's closer to the actual movement, you would probably need to have the sled a little bit on the lighter side. If you compare like putting 500 or 600 pounds on a sled and then you're just pushing or marching it, that's obviously very different than putting 4 or 5 kilos on a sled
mhm.
and then running. So in this case, we'd probably want to stay on the lighter end so that the movement still stays very fast because, again, we're looking to attack it from a sort of a coordination standpoint.
Hmm. Would there be a point, like, do you think there's any point in the season or with any athlete? We'll keep it to sprinting specifically, because I think sport athletes can handle a lot more variation, and the variation for them is probably even more important than the specificity. I think like the difference between the worry about doing too much variation versus too much competition stuff.
Yeah, your sport is so variable anyway.
Yeah, like it's only a concern in, powerlifting, weightlifting, sprinting, swimming, things like that. Um, but would there ever be a situation that you think you would be doing like only sleds or only hill sprints, that you would take like the upright sprinting part away? Or do you think you'd have that in like pretty much all the time?
No, I mean, for the most part, you're going to have at least a day during the week to attack more of the acceleration postures and positions. And then you're going to have a day that's a little bit more focused on upright. And then as you get closer to competition, those days kind of get blended together because you are starting accelerating and then you get up to an upright position. So what you're doing kind of has both of those elements in play. But I do think it's important to have both those, I guess, postures or both those elements of it in there because you need to work on the skill. You need to work on the coordination of that pattern. So
Yeah, I always kind of thought it like the variation is producing a kind of a change, and then when you redo the competition movement or whatever, then it's your chance to like integrate that change into your like current technique kind of thing. Um, and then yeah, if you're doing the full speed competition thing once a week, like once every 7 days, that's not a lot of opportunity for your system to get slow, because you're doing like slower things. That's enough frequency, I would assume, to keep you fast and mitigate any, like if the sled's a little bit slower, like that's not going to drag you down because you're still doing stuff that's very fast.
no, and the other thing too is that there's so many options at play in terms of like you're talking about sleds and hills. We can go after some of the acceleration stuff or the earlier phases of running, but there's a lot that we can do on the upright side as well, right? Whether that's using like wickets where the little banana hurdles are set up and they're spaced out in a way. And so having that banana hurdle there forces the individual to kind of re-coordinate how they're going to step and put force into the ground because they're worried about that barrier being there. So people will tend to strike down underneath their hip a little bit better. They will tend not to kick their foot out or trail their foot behind because they're worried about hitting these hurdles. So you can use wicket runs to kind of put a constraint in there, and you're still running through them as fast as you can, but it's again challenging the pattern, changing what they're doing. So you can have that element in play. Stair running is a useful way to kind of throw some variation into that pattern because if you look at the way the foot and the shin or the lower leg strikes down on the stairs when you're running up the stairs, if you're covering 2, 3, 4 steps at a time, there's some similarities in running mechanics and what you see on the stairs. So again,
Yeah,
it's another way that you can put force into the ground, have fast movements, but you challenge the coordination element
yeah,
of it. So that's why there's not really, at least in my mind, a need to only have one of those things in there because you have so many options on the table to create variation and to challenge the movement pattern that
mm.
you can leave them both in there and you don't have to worry about stagnating things.
Oh, of course. Yeah, yeah. The stairs kind of sounds like it's like wickets plus hills, like it's all the same thing kind of combined.
Yeah,
um
you are running up the stairs and you can adjust it too if you find like stairs that are kind of a steeper angle versus a shallower angle.
mm-hmm.
Um, and that'll
uh,
affect things as well.
yeah, I was gonna ask like what, so we've talked about, yeah, wickets, hills, sleds, parachute. I think that's everything that we've talked about so far. What are your go-tos? What are your favorites? Or is it more like depending on who you're dealing with, you'd give it like this would be your go-to for this person and this would be your go-to for this person, or for this kind of a running technique kind of thing. If you had to pick one fault that this person had, you'd give them this exercise, and if for a different kind of a fault, you'd give them this exercise.
Yeah, I mean, there's like obviously, if someone has problems running upright, then something like wickets or stick running, for example, if they have to hold on to a stick, then you take the arms.
I've never heard of that.
Yeah, so you can like either run with a stick holding it up overhead, or you put it
Mm.
on your back the same way you would a barbell.
Mm.
And so now you take the arms out of it. So again, it challenges the coordination, but you're upright. So there's that sort of aspect we can take with it where someone's struggling with some upright mechanics. So let's do some stick running, or we talked about the curve with Jay, the curve treadmill.
Mm.
Right? You can use the curve treadmill because that's, again, it changes some things.
Yeah,
So you can do it. Sorry.
If you lean forward too far on that thing, you'd have some problems.
Yeah, so you can do. Yeah, it's an upright thing. You can't really accelerate that well on it.
Mm.
But from a upright running standpoint, yeah, if you see somebody struggling with the upright running, you may default to those. If you see somebody struggling with acceleration or the early parts of the run, then you may go sleds or hills or heavy sled pushes or something of that nature. But I mean, to me, the big thing is the feasibility of it. If you're working with one individual and you have all those tools available, then you can pick a lot of different things. If you're working with a group of 10 or 15 people, a hill might be easiest, for example, because there's no equipment needed, or a curved treadmill or stick running, because you just take the dowel, run. You don't need to set up like a whole bunch of different wicket lanes or other things like that. So, and I mean, at the end of the day, if you're working with a relatively young or a varsity level athlete, I mean, if you're just challenging the movement pattern, like I said, you're likely going to see improvement in what they're doing. And it's better than just programming open sprinting and open change of direction year round and not really getting anywhere. So, because it is going to depend highly on the person and your context as to what you're like specifically going to pick for those things.
Yeah, even just the other one, I guess, that I forgot about was the curvilinear running. Even just thinking about doing that sounds like so strange. Like obviously you've run on a curve. If you've ever run around a track, you've run on a curve some of the time, but like outside of that time, I don't think I've ever done it really. It's always been like a, if anything, a very minor change of direction, and then I'm going straight again. You know.
Yeah, and to me, that's maybe the most underrated variation that you can throw in if we're talking about a general,
Yeah.
just training. Because look at how many sports, especially something like basketball, for example, you're on such a small court, you almost never run in a straight line.
Yeah.
You're almost always you're accelerating forward, you're developing horizontal speed, but it's always skewing, moving to the left, moving to the right, avoiding defenders. See the same thing in rugby, football, soccer, a lot of curvilinear movements. Baseball, I mean, as much as there's a straight line from the plate to first base and first base to second base, they're rounding. Well, they literally call it rounding the bases for a reason, because you're running in a bit of a curvilinear way. So to me, for anyone out there who's working with athletes that need to change direction and need to kind of shake things up, yeah, you can work on the linear mechanics, like work on accelerating, work on upright running, throw some of these drills in there. But team sport athletes, especially, like that variation of curvilinear movement is such a huge way that you can challenge that movement pattern in a way that they're going to use in their sport. And again, that could just be for sprinting stuff, whether it's running around like the center circle on a soccer field, or
Mhm.
doing accelerations around that sort of a loop. You can make it shallower, so it's more of a high-speed run where you're just slightly changing the way that you're
Yeah.
moving. You can have curvilinear running into a hard cut. There's so many options available for people who work with athletes that need to move fast
Mhm.
from a overarching, call it curvilinear running standpoint,
Yeah.
that you can 100% break that speed, create stagnation loop with the curvilinear patterns. 100%.
Yeah, that was actually, now that I'm thinking about it, that was a big thing that we did when I played at UW as a defensive lineman. We would run there's these two big rings that either was two separate rings or it was one huge ring that got twisted into a figure eight, and we would run a figure eight and try to like obviously do it as fast as you can, but stay as low as you can and like dip down to grab a towel or something that was inside one of the rings. And I mean, if you watch football on Sundays, you see the best edge pass rushers are ones that can like cut that edge and curve and lean and bend, or around that edge. And man, I yeah, some people were very, very good at that and very smooth and could bend and lean and have the speed and coordination to do that, and some people like 100% could not, and it was like night and day. It was crazy. But even from like a visual, I'm imagining anyway, from a visual aspect, if you're on the straight of a track and you've got like 8 lanes going straight down the track, and you're lined up at this side, like you're in lane 1, pointed on a diagonal towards lane 8 and expecting to finish back in lane 1, like that, to me, that just messes with my mind, having to like run down these lanes but curving through all of them. I don't know if that would have an impact or not, but
I don't think
that's
you'd have to do it on track. When I'm thinking curvilinear running, I'm thinking more on fields or.
oh, for sure. But yeah, just I'm imagining that in my head, and it's messing with my brain, which I feel like would have an impact on how you adapt to the pattern too.
Well, yeah, because if you go back to some of those, like the underlying principles, like with some of
Mhm.
the courses, right, that we took at Waterloo, there's lines on the road, there's lines on a track, there's lines in an airport, all that type of stuff, because that information comes into our brain and then it helps direct us like, oh, I should keep going in a straight line because I see these lanes and
Mhm.
I'm picking up on those, and that helps my movement move in the
Mhm.
direction that I want to go. So yeah, if you were it it would definitely affect it, but I feel like it's easier in an open context where you're now reacting to a ball, the defender, things. Now you're running curvilinear and moving and changing direction based on a person or movement or the ball or other things like that, which I think then makes it a little bit easier. But yeah, I feel like the curvilinear stuff can make such a difference, I think, for a lot of athletes, and it's a way to again challenge that running pattern and break that stagnation. So that way in an off season, team sport athletes aren't just training doing linear speed stuff.
Mhm.
They're actually training doing movements in other directions. And then you get to take that pattern and bring it back into your sport, where you get the randomness or the reaction component of having to move based on, again, a ball, a defender, or something that's happening outside of your
Mhm.
control.
Yeah, I feel like it definitely is really underrated. Like, even like I hadn't considered it again until this conversation, really, which is really cool, and I can see how it would apply to a lot of different sports. Um, Even like like the crossover, like when you change direction in hockey, it's crossovers, and that to me is one of the most like, you almost like never move in a straight, you never, literally never move in a straight line in hockey ever. um and so obviously the foot mechanics are a little bit different at times, um but you do get like a similar kind of, if you're running on a curve, depending on how tight the curve is, like a crossover mechanic, it's similar. And like the forces that your torso has to like resist and then produce force through would be very similar. um I was listening to another podcast in the last couple weeks where this person was talking about they do a lot of isometric stuff and like longer hold isometric stuff, like up to like, I mean, upwards of 30 seconds at times. Um, and what they'll do sometimes is get their athletes to do different like hand motions or arm motions, or they're being perturbed in a certain kind of a way or whatever. But the point is, it's just you're holding a normal position, like a split squat, like the bottom of a split squat position, um, and then you're moving your arms in like a figure eight pattern or whatever. And the point of that is it's activating your cerebellum, because there's like a fine motor component, because you're like moving your arms in that figure eight. There's a fine motor component that then is helping reinforce this split squat pattern as well, that like lunge position as well, because and even though it's not related, just the fact that you're doing a fine motor control thing while in a split squat, the entire CNS is being like reaffirmed or remapped, kind of thing, was how he was explaining it. And it kind of, this feels like similar to me.
Yeah, it's a variation. It's a perturbation. It's you're challenging the movement in some way,
Mm-hmm.
right? So you're forcing the body to kind of reorganize some things, develop more stability, like you said, develop a stronger connection with that motor pattern.
Mm-hmm.
And so to some extent, breaking this stagnation cycle of speed work is exactly that. How can we add variation? How can we change? How can we make it the same while also making it different? Is kind of
Mm-hmm.
what it
Yeah.
is. So yeah, I'm still running. I'm still moving at a fast speed. My limbs are still moving very quickly, but now I'm moving on a loop, or now I'm running over wickets, or now I'm running up a hill, or on a curved treadmill, or whatever. You're doing all of these. You're challenging that in some way. So it's the same, but it's different.
Mm-hmm.
Similar
Mm-hmm.
enough to still contribute to performance, but different enough to challenge the skill to make it, a stronger connection and a more concrete ability that you can then draw back to in competition.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. Um, does any of your thought process change with agility stuff? We talked about like it's speed, but it's also agility stuff. Or I I imagine you'll have different drills or different exercises that you reach to for agility stuff than you would for acceleration, upright sprinting stuff.
Yeah, I mean, again, it's with a change of direction, it's a little bit more interesting because you it, basically it's your creativity that limits you to what you can do. Um, so really, I mean, if you look at whether it's linear speed or change of direction speed, stuff is littered with like drills essentially, right? And think about how many agility drills are just, yeah, you need to learn at some point, run and decelerate, and then run, decelerate, and do some of those things. But at some point, you have to start challenging it beyond just that. So I think to me, one of the big things with agility, change of direction, or sport speed, if you want to use a fancy buzzword for it, there's times and places earlier in training to do these drills, right? Whether that's A marches, deceleration drills, things like that. But then at some point you have to put it all back together. So because they don't really transfer all that well because the speed's not high enough, the it's just not enough to challenge what someone's doing. So with the change of direction stuff, yeah, do the basics, do what you need to do to build that foundation. But then after that, just challenge their ability to move in different ways on different surfaces and different places. Try doing some, yeah, like a curvilinear run, and then you have to cut left or right, or cutting left or right into a curvilinear run, or running zigzags or figure eights, like you talked about in practice, and do it on turf or be on a hardwood floor, like in the court, or do it on grass versus artificial turf, something like that. Like there's so many ways that you could challenge that movement rather than just doing basic run to the cone, cut left, run to the cone, cut right, run to the cone, stop. Like there's really no limit to what you could do to kind of work from a change of direction standpoint on that. At least, that I think. And then so if you start to introduce some of those, sort of random movements and curvilinear and throwing in some different elements of reacting or not reacting, again, that's going to help build a pattern that's more similar to what they're actually going to use in their sport when they're on the field or on the court, and they have to respond to something random that's out of their control. So yeah, I don't really know if there's like a go-to, but I would encourage people to kind of be creative with how they're putting that stuff together. That's something that I look back on, like with Waterloo, with the basketball team. We did a good job of building the basics. There was probably more we could have tossed in there from doing some curvilinear running or forcing them to decel and reaccelerate and move in circles and arcing patterns and other things like that. That we didn't end up doing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean this stuff sounds similar to some of the stuff that Jay was talking about. I guess 2 weeks ago, um, and building in some of that like reactivity kind of thing where I remember he was talking about like a Y drill kind of thing, or there's one person's running at another person, and then once the first person cuts right, that's the signal for the other person to cut to their right, which would be your left. And you're like you're going to do some agility task, but you're not sure which direction you're going. You're waiting for a signal. Basically, you're having to read and react to something. But yeah, that's interesting to I guess it doesn't really matter because all of you only need to do agility really in sport. And every time you do agility in sport, it's going to be different than any other agility task you've done before because of the constraints around it. So yeah, if you're just putting interesting creative constraints on whatever task you're doing, I mean, maybe it is just run to the cone and cut left, but yeah, this time you're in sand, or this time you're in turf, or this time you're on hardwood, or this time you have to do a shuffle step when you cut, or you have to do a crossover step, or you have to do a spin or whatever. And you're to build, like, kind of go back to what we talked about with Jay. You're like building the library.
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly. And you're putting more tools in the toolbox. And when they do have to do something like that, at least it's not the first time that they've done something kind of similar. Yeah, that's interesting.
That's cool. Yeah, and I mean, obviously there's way more details we could go into on each of those specific means of things, whether it's, creating change of direction drills or stick running versus running on the curve, treadmill versus running on a hill, or parachutes or whatever, right? There's so many tools at our disposal. But I think the important takeaway from this stuff is that, yeah, speed creates speed, but it also creates stagnation if we just do the same thing over and over again, or just keep our foot on the gas and you just ran, as fast as you could for as long as you could, and then just shut it down. Your body eventually will adapt to that and won't actually get any better at the high speed coordination. You need to sprint fast or change direction really well. So just knowing that there's other tools, there's other ways out there for coaches to introduce variability and constraints to challenge how the athletes move so they actually get better at those movements. And I mean, yeah, if people want to know more about any of those particular means, then of course people can reach out, they can ask questions, whatever. But it would be a lot to cover all of those things in one episode. So to me, the overarching concept is more important. How can you introduce some variability to throw off that stagnation so you can keep moving forward?
Yeah. I mean, there's lots of great drills in there. yeah, huge. If anybody's training athletes, then definitely do some curvilinear running for sure. Like some variation of that. The stick running is really interesting to me too. Just because like the arm swing feels like it's so important. I was wondering like a week or two ago if sprinters ever do any like sprints but with their hands at their sides or whatever.
Yeah,
Um,
there's stick running overhead. There's running without arms for sure that goes on.
would you guys do any like would you be faster to reach for like wickets or like stiff leg sprints or like things where you're going in a straight line before curvilinear running because most of the time you're running in a straight line? Or is that not the case? It's just kind of whatever feels like the right thing to do.
I mean, it's certainly easier if you know what you're doing in a straight line to then apply it to different
Mm,
directions and moving. So again, whether this was a track athlete or a team sport athlete, teaching them the basics from a linear standpoint is probably important.
mm,
And then, but once they've started to figure that out, then you can start to challenge the skill in different directions. So to me, the transfer from the linear to change of direction it's I've found it to be pretty effective.
mm.
So yeah, I
But
would
even
start with some of the linear stuff and then move
yeah, but even
those other
even
things.
sorry, even with like if this person's literally only a sprinter, like they're 22 and they have no interest in ever playing a sport, would you like is curvilinear running something you'd reach for towards them, or would you be more like sticking to things that are in a straight line?
I mean, I'd probably stick to things that are in a straight line, but if that person wants to run relays, if they run indoor, then they're probably gonna have to deal with a turn. And then
Yeah.
some form of curvilinear running is going to be important so they can figure out what to do when running a bend.
Mm,
So I feel like
yeah.
there's always gonna have to be some form of curvilinear running in there.
Yeah. That's fair. That's fair. Cool. Um, yeah. I mean, that was good. I like that a lot.
Hopefully people take something away from it. And again, if there's any specific questions, then let me know. Reach out.
Yeah. Yeah.
Happy to discuss.
Um, the only other specific question that I have is what were you listening to this week?
What was I listening to this week? That's a
Yeah.
great question.
Thanks, man.
Um, I was kind of dipping back into uh, some of the metal stuff. So I was listening to some Children of Bodom, Finnish, like symphonic metal band.
That's cool. Sounds
Yeah, so
interesting.
they're pretty good.
Yeah. Um, symphonic metal is so that would be like
Or sorry,
there's
not symphonic, melodic. So
melodic. Oh, okay,
sorry,
okay.
yeah, my bad.
So
Melodic metal.
it's not like as much shredding.
It's a lot of shredding.
Oh, okay.
It's in like a very like up and down sort of melodic, like it,
Oh, I see. I see. Okay,
yeah,
that's cool.
but it's still heavy, and
Yeah,
it's like
of course.
it's still got all that element to it. And they're one of my favorite metal bands. I think like they're very good.
Yeah, that's cool that you have so many that you say like they're one of my favorites.
I mean, I get caught in a cycle, and then I'm like, oh, this band, they're so good, and you just listen to all their stuff, and then you discover something like or remember something else. It's hard for me to pick a favorite, man.
Yeah.
There's so many talented bands out there.
Mm.
But
Well, yeah, definitely, definitely.
but yeah, I was listening to a lot of Bodom this week. So
Nice.
I was on
Very cool.
the Finnish metal train.
Very cool. Um, this morning was my first time back in the gym in about a week since I told you that I had the hamstring, like the calf thing, and then the hamstring thing, and then the back thing.
Yeah. It's
Um,
just all downhill for you.
yeah, but everything felt all right today, which was nice. But I was listening to, uh, I made a point of going to the gym and listening to 1,000 Foot Crutch today because I stumbled upon them last time we talked about music stuff. So yeah, I had them go on, and that was nice. I've only ever listened to I think maybe two or three of their songs before, but got into more of their stuff today, and it's all pretty solid from my perspective anyway. There, I know you said you hadn't heard any of their stuff or hadn't heard of them in general. I can't remember.
I had heard of them, never heard any of their stuff. I
Okay.
know the name. I can look
They're
into it though.
they're kind of in the same realm of like rock as like a 3 Days Grace or as a Papa Roach kind of stuff.
Okay.
In
I'll take a
that,
look.
at least according to Spotify, they're similar. So, which I guess I would agree. But yeah, they're solid in my non-musical opinion.
I'll give a listen. I'll report back. That'll give me
Okay.
something to listen to. Something
All
new.
right. All right. Sounds good. Sounds good. But yeah, that was a good one for sure. Definitely some good takeaways in there. Yeah, and if anybody wants us to talk about something specific or has questions for Tommy about running on a left-hand turn, then then you can find us on Instagram at Speed Strength Show, Speed Strength Performance, or Braden Southern, whichever one we'll get back to you. And yeah, that was the Speed Strength Show. Thanks for coming along, world.
We'll see you next week.
Peace.